Since Israel's imposition of a total blockade on Gaza in March, for months, no food, water, electricity or fuel entered the besieged enclave. Now, its population is facing Israeli-imposed starvation, with over 200 Palestinians, half of them children, dying of malnutrition at the time of this recording. On July 29th, the UN-backed Integrated Food Security Phase Classification issued its gravest warning yet, that the worst-case scenario of famine is currently playing out in the Gaza Strip. Instead of forcing Israel to allow more aid trucks through, countries are airdropping pallets of aid, an operation which UNRWA has slammed as being ineffective and even dangerous. Aid trucks are starting to trickle in, but the numbers fall far below the UN estimated requirement of 500 to 600 trucks daily. Meanwhile, Israel has enforced a militarized food distribution system in Gaza, run by the controversial Israel-US-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which has seen hundreds of Palestinian aid seekers shot by Israeli soldiers at GHF-run aid points. In this context, small, unofficial Palestinian-led mutual aid groups are trying to do what they can to buy up and distribute supplies, which they source through informal networks on the ground. While bigger NGOs are bound by international bureaucracy and red tape, these groups are more nimble, have less overhead, and are able to distribute aid quickly. We speak to Hala Saber, one of the co-founders of the Samir Project, a Palestinian-led grassroots initiative run via social media and word of mouth. Hala launched the project over a year ago, naming it in honour of her uncle, who was killed by Israeli forces in Gaza. Along with two other members of the Palestinian diaspora, California-based Lina Dajani, who organises medical aid, and an anonymous activist who runs the Instagram page Translating Palestine, Hala has raised millions of dollars and coordinated with people on the ground in Gaza to respond to requests for food, medicine and emergency aid via WhatsApp groups. Hala Saber, thank you so much for joining us. How are Palestinians surviving, and what is the situation your partners on the ground are seeing?
The situation is really tough. The starvation, especially over the last month, has just gotten much, much worse. And our team is struggling because, first of all, it's August, so it's extremely hot. It can hit up to 34 degrees Celsius. Finding food for the last month was very, very difficult, and I found it was very, very expensive.
In this context, how is the Samir Project able to source supplies and distribute them?
Every week is different. March 2nd was the second day of Ramadan, and that's when the borders closed and aid stopped coming in completely. And at first there were warehouses, there were goods that allowed people to kind of sustain themselves. But it was more towards Eid, so the end of March, that we started to run out of meat and chicken and a lot of the supplies. And in April and May, gradually, prices of lentils and rice and flour started increasing. And doing any kind of distributions, we just started to see the numbers increasing. Also for the water trucks, because there was no gas, right? So nothing coming in, just kept increasing prices over time. We sounded the alarms, not only as the Samir Project, but all the mutual aid groups were talking about it, and they were saying that we are running out of food, something needs to happen. So it's not something that happened overnight. It's something that happened over time, and weeks and weeks and weeks where people were warning about this. And it's until July that we started to get messages from kitchens, the kitchens that we purchased the food pots from, that started to tell us, well, today we can't cook anything because there is nothing. So it started to go from 10 or 20 pots a day across the strip to maybe 5 pots every couple of days. And then on July 17th, July 16th, July 17th, that's when everything erupted, because members of the community started to shut down these kitchens. The reason being is because there was no fairness in how the food was being distributed, not because of the mutual aid groups or because of the kitchens, but because of scarcity, right? And this is a chaos that's by design from the military occupation to make people frustrated, where some camps get some small limited amounts of food and some camps get nothing. So eventually the people protested and the kitchens closed, and for 2 to 3 days there was no food being distributed. And it was very, very difficult for the mutual aid groups when you actually have the money and you have the team, but you don't have the food. And 3-4 days later, what happened is food started to appear again. And a lot of people were confused by that, because they were saying, well, there's a famine and how is there food? There are multiple reasons for that. The first reason being there are farms in Gaza, and there are 2 types of farms. There are farms that are quite large, multiple dunams, where they like grow tons of vegetables. And then you have smaller farmers who have smaller pieces of land and also grow. So that's the first source. The second source is the murderous Gaza, so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. With every day and every X amount of flour bags, a lot of people would die. So the aid did come in, but there was a large price being paid for that. Not only were people being killed by the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, but a lot of people would also get shrapnels and injuries, sometimes lifelong injuries. So that's how we got flour and some rice and lentils into the markets. And the third way was the horrific airdrop. The airdrops that literally would fall on people and kill them. And then that whatever's in the box would be taken and sold into the market. So you can imagine people who are literally risking their lives to get this, to be able to feed their families, would sell it at insanely high prices because it was the price of their life. So whatever we got from the markets was really, really expensive. The vegetables were really, really expensive because getting water was really expensive, growing is really expensive, risking their lives on these farms is really expensive. This whole situation from, mid-July until pretty much now is all by design to make people risk their lives to eat. And then it's by design to create a market that has insanely high prices where no one can afford anything. And what makes the situation even worse is the lack of cash. A lot of these people who would get the aid from the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation or from the airdrop want to sell it. They don't have bank accounts and people don't have cash. So there was always this clash of, I don't have a bank account, so you can't really transfer money to me, and I need cash. And to get cash, because there's very little cash in Gaza, so it created a system where if you as a person had money in your bank account, let's say a friend or family or your GoFundMe sent you money into your bank account, either you withdraw that money and pay around 45% to get cash and then go purchase something, or you just keep it stuck in your bank account.
How has the situation changed since then?
Since mid-July until just a few days ago, I would say the 7th of August, I would say it was the most horrific, difficult time for mutual aid groups, because during that period, as I mentioned, it was really difficult to purchase anything. It was really difficult to figure out who to distribute it to. But luckily, on August 7th, aid started flowing in through trucks. And that made a huge difference because overnight, goods the prices of goods dropped by 80 to 90%. Not everything, but a lot of the things. Those goods had flour, sugar, rice, and lentils. No meat, no chicken, no vegetables, no fruit. So far for the last few days, there has been a flow of aid coming in, relatively decent amount. There's no clear numbers on how many trucks, but for Gaza, prior to the genocide, to be able to feed the 2 million people, they needed around 600 trucks per day. So you can imagine with an ongoing famine that we would need way more than 600 actually, but that's definitely not the amount that's coming in right now. It's just that this flow that came in suddenly allowed the prices to drop and for people to be able to buy flour and to buy sugar. Some diapers came in and formula, which is, I think that was one of the hardest things, is the lack of formula and having mothers watch their babies die in front of them and begging for a can of formula that cost over $100 cash. As mutual aid groups in the last 3-4 days, there has been a sense of relief, a relative sense of relief that prices are dropping. The markets do have flour and rice and lentils, and we're starting to do food pot distributions again. We're not sure how long this is going to last. We feel this sense of relief that we can distribute food again, but we feel this kind of fear of if there's a massive displacement, what does that mean in terms of providing water, providing shelter, tents, space? I mean, something that people forget is that people in Gaza, the 2 million people, are crammed in 25% of the land. The majority of the land is considered a red zone. The majority of the land is not accessible for people. So people are really crammed, and for us to even build tents, we don't find space. So things are extremely uncertain right now.
We're seeing a sort of increasingly harrowing images of malnourished children coming out of Gaza, and obviously the deaths of Palestinians from Israeli-imposed starvation are mounting daily. Has interest in your initiative increased as a result of this in recent weeks?
I think the images of starvation has moved people to donate not only to the Samir Project but to the other mutual aid groups. There has been a huge influx of money, which is in so many ways upsetting, because for the weeks prior to that we had been pushing and pushing, not only the Samir Project but the other mutual aid groups. We were all suffering in terms of collecting donations to feed people, and it's like the world had to wait to see these images to donate and support. We are always and forever grateful for the community who's supporting, because without them we would not be able to do what we do. But there is a sense of disappointment by Palestinians from Gaza in general that their babies and their children had to starve to death to feel that there's some rage, you know.
Gaza has faced problems with clean water access over the last 2 decades due to Israeli restrictions. Now its population is on the brink of a man-made drought, with fuel shortages likely to deprive thousands of children of clean water. Can you talk a bit about how your organisation has worked to deal with this situation?
From the very start, we started doing water trucks. We started with 10,000 or 20,000 liters a day. Now we're averaging at around 100,000 liters per day, and we are hoping to double that in the next couple of weeks, just because of the heat and the need. We're not doing this on our own. There are other mutual aid groups like Reviving Gaza, the Zainab Project, and sometimes private funders who get water trucks. And we have groups where we coordinate where these water trucks go, so that we don't, pour all the water into some areas and neglect other areas. The way we get them is there's desalination plants. The water truck goes, we get the water, we check, the salinity to make sure that it's drinkable and it's not super salty. And after the ceasefire in February, a lot of people, hundreds of thousands, moved up north. So north has around maybe 80 to 85% of the population of Gaza is in the north right now. So this also creates overcrowded camps, no space, and even in some areas getting the water truck in is extremely difficult, right? So people have to walk for kilometers with their jerry cans and go get the water and come back. So we're trying to find solutions around that as a collective of mutual aid. And I think the biggest challenge that we're facing right now is gas, because the water truck prices have increased over time. At some point we were paying 140 shekels for 1,000 liters, and it's now up to 250 shekels. They're saying that gas is going to come in. If that comes in, it's going to provide some relief for the water trucks, because that means we can do more and more and more.
So you provide a multitude of services. So it's not just food, water, shelter, but you also provide medical services. Could you talk a bit about that, and also describe how in recent weeks, what would you say are the main cases that your partners on the ground are dealing with?
We found a lot of malnourished children, rapid weight loss, constant diarrhea. The biggest difficulty in terms of medical was babies. Babies were losing weight rapidly. Mothers couldn't breastfeed because they weren't eating themselves, so their bodies were not producing milk. Cans of formula were very, very, very hard to find. A lot of them were expired. They were extremely expensive. It was horrific, really. I think the baby malnourishment cases were extremely heartbreaking. The GHF injuries are really horrific as well over the last month. We've had people from our camp, the Rifat Al Araid camp, which is a camp for some of the most severe medical cases where they don't have space for them in hospitals, so they stay in the Rifat Al Araid camp awaiting evacuation. Unfortunately, some of the men from our camp went to these GHF points, even though they had access to 1 meal a day, but they wanted to provide food for their extended family, and they just, a lot of them came back with broken bones, shrapnels, wounds all over, and one of the cases is so bad and the shrapnels are all over his legs that he can't walk right now. And this is a man who I spoke to and told me that, you know, we have the meals in the camp and I didn't feel the need to go, but when I saw that all the men were going, I decided to go this one time, and in this one time he got these shrapnels, and now it's going to take time to recover. A lot of the shrapnel cases are told by doctors that they're just going to have to wait until their body lets the shrapnels out, just because they don't have capacity to take shrapnels out of everybody. I think, you know, there's the cleanliness aspect, a lot of skin diseases. There are the war injuries and the wounds, and then you have the malnourishment of babies and children, but also adults. Like, we have a case of an old man now. I think he's in his 70s and he's literally a skeleton. Just by some trucks coming in, that doesn't really resolve the problem. These people need proper medical care. Our work really is just a band-aid solution, and the international organizations need to step up.
It sounds like due to the scarcity of resources, you've had to make some quite difficult decisions as an organisation. Could you talk a bit about that, and what are some of the most difficult decisions you've had to make?
The last 3 weeks have been the most difficult because we couldn't get access to large amounts of food for mass distributions. And even when we got, let's say, 20 cans of formula, we cannot choose which babies live and which babies die. And this is why we chose the strategy of giving it to the heads of pediatrician in hospitals. So, for example, Dr. Ahmed Al-Farra, who is the head of pediatrician in Nasser Hospital, we would give him the cans. Some of the cans, you know, had specific formula for, you know, premature babies or anything like that. And he would choose which babies get them, which is extremely heartbreaking, because when our teams go to these hospitals, they come back crying. Our own team members come back crying because they say the mothers are crying if they don't get a formula can. So this has been the most difficult thing for us, trying to be fair in a genocide and a famine where the military occupation has designed it to be chaotic and almost impossible is a very tough position to be in. But luckily we have a collective of mutual aid groups that are supportive, and we talk to each other all the time. So if we have a list of malnourished children that we're delivering food to and following up constantly so that, you know, they stay alive, we make sure that we pass on some cases to the other mutual aid groups, especially the most severe cases. So that's kind of how we try to manage it. I'm sure we've made mistakes. I'm sure not everything was right, but we tried within the community to make the decisions the best way we can.